It turns out the climate emergency is an emergency. Who knew? Is there anything you can do about it? Let's find out on the Growth Busters podcast.
Calling. Call the Growth Busters. Whoa.
We're living on a full planet, so shrinking our footprint is the order of the day. How do we live good, sustainable lives? Explore that with us here on the Growth Busters podcast. I'm Dave Gardner, director of the documentary Growth Busters, Hooked on Growth, and I'm glad to be joined by environmental policy expert Grace Stark.
Hello, Dave.
Thanks for joining me today. Before we get into it, I want to remind you that you can learn more, subscribe to email updates, and donate to our nonprofit project at growthbusters.org. All right, well, let's get right to it. First, a quick news blurb for you, Grace. The world premiere of a new documentary that I'm really excited about is November 11th at Doc NYC. It's America's biggest documentary film festival. November 11th at Doc NYC, we will get a chance to see, finally, To Kid or Not to Kid. This is a really interesting film. Yeah, I've seen some clips and I've talked to the filmmaker. The filmmaker, believe it or not, is Maxine Trump. No relation.
I looked at that and I was like, it's not his daughter.
In fact, I think she had to make a little mini documentary explaining that there's no relation. Anyway, Maxine turned the camera on herself and her close circle of family and friends as she confronted the idea of not having kids. And so this documentary explores the cultural pressures and harsh criticism that child-free women regularly experience. And the clips I've seen are really pretty thoughtful, and I did an interview with her for a little mini film festival a month or two ago, and she was really just a really sharp filmmaker. So I'm real excited that this
Excellent.
film is coming to the world, and she promises to tell me as soon as she can what other distribution plans there are for the film, and we may have her as a guest on this podcast, perhaps.
That sounds great.
Shall we move on to listener feedback?
I think listener feedback sounds like a good step.
Okay. We always share listener feedback, and so I want to encourage you to provide it as you listen to this episode. If we say something that really ticks you off or we say something that inspires you, we'd love to hear from you. There are a couple of ways you can let us know about that. You can send us an email to podcast@growthbusters.org, or you can certainly post a comment at the Growth Busters podcast Facebook page, or send us a tweet at GrowthBusters on Twitter. And I guess you can also make comments on the website if you're looking at the show notes and listening to the podcast at growthbusters.org. So we'd love to hear from you. And we were glad to hear from Todd after our last episode, which was episode 19, Hurricanes, Climate Change, and Contraception. Todd wrote an email to us in which he said, I listened to a couple of your podcasts, but unsubscribed after your nonsensical oxymoron meme of, quote, sustainable growth, end quote, which does not exist. Oh, and no, solar PV and wind electric are not sustainable either. Thanks anyway. That's from Todd.
Oh, well, I'm sorry we lost a listener, but we do appreciate the feedback. And just because you don't agree, that doesn't mean you can't pipe up and say something, as you mentioned.
Well, thanks for those sentiments, but I think you're being too nice.
Did that upset you?
Well, really, just because the truth is, I don't know, maybe there was something in that podcast where we talked about sustainable growth and I didn't do my usual disclaimer about that. Do you recall? Because I don't like that. I never use that phrase because it is an oxymoron.
Yeah, it is. And there's all these articles that talk about how it is. And I wasn't really sure did he listen to the whole thing? Did you not say, every, minute thing that you usually tack on to that?
I wrote back and I said, Todd, we agree. I think sustainable growth is an oxymoron too, so we're on the same page.
Well,
so
hopefully he resubscribes then.
That would be nice.
Yes.
Yeah, because he certainly got the wrong impression. So for anyone out there listening to us today, sustainable growth of anything cannot go on forever, except maybe personal growth.
Yeah.
Growth in your enlightenment. There's no end to that, I think.
I agree with you. So Todd, come back to us, please. We agree with you.
There we go. And then we did get an email from Cliff. I just finished listening to the podcast and found it up to your high standards. Paper straws are coming back. Yay. Steel straws. Wow. I use a small, narrow plastic straw in my coffee for sipping. Been using the same straw for several months with little cleaning. When I do clean, I use a skewer to push a wad of tissue paper. Hey, look. We get that all the time.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
There's a deer outside.
Yes, a strapping buck walking
listening
through the
to
backyard.
us record.
And that's because we invaded his territory. So he's putting up with us nicely.
Very kind of him.
Okay, so let's see. Where was I? Okay, so when I do clean, I use a skewer to push a wad of tissue paper or cotton through several times. Works fine. Sipping coffee reduces staining, and a small straw protects from burning hot liquid. Cliff went on, interesting contraceptive info. We solved our fertility issue by my having a vasectomy in 1970. Yay, Cliff. Love it when men take responsibility for that part of the deal. And that reminds me that World Vasectomy Day is coming up November 16th, 2018, World Vasectomy Day.
Did we talk about that? I didn't know that was a thing.
Yeah, I think we did.
World Vasectomy Day.
Yep. And I think you said you didn't know that was a thing.
And I still didn't know that was a thing.
So pay more attention.
Sorry.
Wake up. So Grace, you should, and listeners too, please go to worldvasectomyday.org to get a little bit more information about
because
that.
now you know it's a thing.
That's a thing, yeah. And then Cliff went on, the economic growth concept is a necessary, constant topic that needs addressing, and you both handled it well. So thank you, Cliff.
Thank you, Cliff.
Agreed. And on the whole straw thing, I want to give you a report because, I ordered that straw that collapses.
Right.
I had these rigid, reusable plastic straws that I could just run through the dishwasher. But unless I carry a man purse, I don't really have a good place to put them.
Right. And it doesn't fit in your average pocket either.
When I go out, And so I thought, okay, the collapsible one seemed like a good idea. So I ordered one of those at Amazon. And I finally said, I've got to use it. And I'd been reluctant to use it, Grace, because I knew it was going to be a little bit of a cleaning hassle. But I finally thought about it. And I thought, well, let's say I take it to a restaurant and I use it to sip tea or a soda, and I'm going to fold it back up and put it in its little case all sticky. No. What I can do, though, is I can put it in a glass of water and sip water through it for a minute or two to actually kind of pre-clean it before I fold it up and bring it home. So I thought, okay, I think this might work.
Right, and then you'd just be doing like a rinse cycle at home.
Yeah.
So perfect.
The other problem that I had was that there's a little cleaning squeegee that comes with it, and I couldn't get it out of the case.
That's
Remember
right.
that?
Yeah.
So finally I did. I went and got some tweezers, as you had suggested, and those didn't work. I actually had to finally dig in there with a toothpick to get the little cleaning thing to come out. Wow. And I thought, you know what? I should just try running it through this straw. Maybe I should clean it before I use it anyway. And I couldn't get it through the straw because every place that the unit folds, the surgical tubing inside is collapsed from having been folded for a while. And I have not been able to get it to relax. I've blown through it. And so I think it's a big fail. But I've decided, you know what? I don't need a foldable one. And I shared that the people who had done a Kickstarter project who claimed to have invented this told me that I had gotten a counterfeit because they weren't shipping product yet when I ordered this from Amazon.com.
Oh, wow.
So I went to Amazon today just to sort of see what it was called so I could tell people if you ordered the one that I ordered that you may not be satisfied with that. Well, you know what? There are a dozen collapsible straws that look just like this now on Amazon. Everybody's got one. And that is, I don't know, I don't get it. That's so weird because they all have different names. There's shark straw and you name it. They all obviously are identical.
Right.
I think they're identical to the final straw, the people who claim that they created the first product. So my guess is that they got some company in China to manufacture these for them, and that company in China is now making them for anybody who wants to order them and brand them as their own, and either through a theft of intellectual property or failure to protect intellectual property that the people that maybe invented it have lost control of it. That's my guess.
I can see that happening. That's unfortunate. Sounds like the final straw. Sorry.
So my decision is, okay, I'm just going to live without a straw a lot of times when I go out to a restaurant, and to, just kind of find a way to take this longer straw with me. And I went to the movie just recently, and
did you take that?
I wrapped the straw in my cloth napkin because I was going to eat a sandwich at the movie, and I didn't want to use a paper napkin, so I took my own cloth napkin and I just wrapped it around the straw.
And that worked.
Kept it clean on the way to the theater and kept it from getting anything dirty on my way back. So there's a way around that.
Yeah, it sounds like one of those things where this is sort of like in its infancy, this idea of the collapsible straws. So I feel like as the companies get more maybe feedback, they might change the development. And, if there are the counterfeit straws out there, hopefully that eventually gets caught. They could change the design.
Yep.
So.
But truth be told, I think we should offer this final thought about this, and that is that straws and plastic bags are a really small portion of the plastics that are being found in the ocean, and that really the bigger problems are a lot of other plastic packaging, especially all the single-use yogurts and bottled water and things like that. So, you're not going to save the planet just by ditching the straw.
Right.
You have to ditch plastics almost altogether, and even that isn't going to save the planet. There's so many ways that we need to alter our behavior to live more sustainably if we want to have a planet for future generations.
I think that sounds like a scary Halloween costume. Going as a piece of plastic.
There you go. I bet you there'll be a few. Good idea, though. You'll have to send us a selfie if you do that.
Yeah,
Grace.
I might. That sounds like an easy, cost-effective costume. And you'd be recycling plastic bags if you have any. Just wrap them around yourself.
Yep. So more listener feedback on the Growthbusters podcast Facebook page. We got a couple of comments about a Washington Post story that I had posted there, headlined, "Earth's population is skyrocketing. How do you feed 10 billion people sustainably?" A sobering report published Wednesday in the journal Nature argues that a sustainable food system that doesn't ravage the environment is going to require dramatic reforms, including a radical change in dietary habits. To be specific, cheeseburgers are out and fruits and veggies are in. This is from that story. Grace, I'm sure you might have a few thoughts too, but we did get some thoughts from listeners. Betty Ware, thank you for your comment. The assumption that world human population will reach 10 billion is troubling. Yes. I hate to see that. I hate to see the assumption that it's just going to happen, because we could alter course.
Yeah, these assumptions are based on, I think, projections.
Yeah.
And those projections are troubling.
Yeah. That's the assumption that we're not going to do. We're not going to get serious about changing course. Yeah. And then Michael O'Brien, thanks for writing. He wrote, "It will crash at or near 8 billion from effects of abrupt global heat gain from a methane turnover event similar to the Permian end." Well, it could be. There are a number of things that could keep us from ever getting to 10 billion. One, of course, would be if we just got smart and started having smaller families, fewer children. Another would be, well, you know what? Billions may starve to death because the way we're feeding people today isn't sustainable.
Yeah.
We're so far into overshoot. If you're new to this podcast, we have 7.6 billion people all convinced that they need to live good lives, and the definition of a good life has gotten a little bit out of control for a few billion of us. So we are way into overshoot, so far so that we have got to ultimately reduce our population significantly, and those of us in the rich world need to really scale back our lifestyles.
I agree.
We've got a lot of work to do. So it's not going to be just ditching plastic bags and plastic straws, and it's not going to be just giving up meat. And actually, I think I've seen some pretty reasonable suggestions that, you know what, you don't have to give up meat, but if everybody just really cut back on meat, that would be significant. And that is huge. Not as huge as having fewer children, though. Got to fit that in one more time. More from the story, the authors concluded that the current methods of producing, distributing, and consuming food aren't environmentally sustainable, and that damage to the planet could make it less hospitable for human existence. A core message from the researchers is that efforts to keep climate change at an acceptable level won't be successful without a huge reduction in meat consumption. Well, yeah, absolutely, that would be a part of it.
Emphasis on the huge.
And Johann Rockstrom, who's one of my heroes, he's an earth scientist at Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research in Germany, and he's been doing really groundbreaking planetary boundaries research. He was quoted in this story as saying, "Feeding humanity is possible. It's just a question of whether we can do it in an environmentally responsible way." Well, it's only environmentally responsible if it's environmentally sustainable. And I think Johann probably knows that the way we're doing it today is not responsible or sustainable, because we're pumping aquifers dry, we're creating ocean dead zones, we only have about 60 years worth of fertile soil left. We're doing a lot of things that can't be done forever.
Absolutely.
Yep. So I will include a link to this story in the show notes, and that's all I have to say about it.
That about covers it. There's just so many issues that we already have going on, and if we don't do something to curtail that or minimize it, then we're headed for catastrophe. So
you bet your booties, Granny. Okay, so now to the big story that we really want to talk about today is early October 2018, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change issued a new report called Global Warming of 1.5 degrees Celsius. This shook the world a little bit because this was the most serious emergency alarm bell kind of message that we've gotten. Mm-hmm. And so I think we should spend a little bit of time talking about that. First, I want to give you, the listener, a little bit of background. I even have a hard time remembering all of the temperatures, the goals, the milestones, and what have you. So quick background on that. 2010, negotiators around the world adopted this goal of limiting warming to no more than 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit or 2 degrees Celsius above the average pre-industrial temperature. Well, that was in 2010. That was the goal they came up with. Well, we've already warmed 1 degree centigrade, getting us halfway to that limit. We're halfway there already. In 2015, the Paris Accord set a more demanding target of limiting warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, remember, we've already warmed 1 degree centigrade over, so we only have just 0.5 degrees centigrade or 0.9 degrees Fahrenheit left before we hit that more stringent target that the Paris Accord set. Now, the new report is indicating that we're likely to reach that 1.5 degrees centigrade limit sometime between 2018 and 2052 at current rates of increase, and that we're extremely likely to blast right through that limit and then have to work even harder to bring the temperature back down to that target after that time. Did I do a halfway decent job of?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that being said, you're also talking about once we get to that level, yes, working to bring us back down, but there's going to be consequences of reaching that level. So, I mean, it's going to, that, like you said, it's going to be even harder to work us back down. We don't want to get to that point to have to do that.
So we'll include a link in the show notes to the summary report, which is a little bit easier read than the extended report, and to a couple of the best stories that we'll probably talk about a little bit. One of the best was an Associated Press report written by Seth Borenstein. So I'll definitely give you a link to that, and I'll read a few lines from that report. The headline was, UN Report on Global Warming Carries Life or Death Warning. That's big. That's bigger than we've seen, wouldn't you say?
It's much more, I've been using that word catastrophic, but it's much more, I guess people would say doomsday, but I think it's also much more realistic, as terrifying as it is.
Yeah, it unfortunately needs to be terrifying. I like the headline. I'm not thrilled that that's where we are, but I really approve of the media finally really sounding the alarm, and I really want to applaud this story because it's one of the clearest reports I found on this news. But truth is, it's really bleak. Yeah. So let me read a couple of little blurbs out of it. Preventing an extra single degree of heat could make a life or death difference in the next few decades for multitudes of people and ecosystems on this fast-warming planet, an international panel of scientists reported Sunday. But they provide little hope that the world will rise to the challenge. What do you say? What do you say about that? Reading on. The UN organization detailed how Earth's weather, health, and ecosystems would be in better shape if the world's leaders could somehow limit future human-caused warming to just 0.9 degrees Fahrenheit, a half degree Celsius from now, instead of the globally agreed-upon goal of 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit or 1 degree Celsius. I'm sorry I have to keep reading both of those temperatures. I'm glad the AP put Fahrenheit in the report because we've got to say Fahrenheit in order for people in the U.S.
to grasp how the significance. Yeah.
So, among other things, half as many people would suffer from lack of water if we were to reach those more robust goals. There would be fewer deaths and illnesses from heat, smog, and infectious diseases. Seas would rise nearly 4 inches less. Half as many animals with backbones, that's vertebrates, and plants would lose the majority of their habitats. There would be substantially fewer heat waves, downpours, and droughts. The West Antarctic ice sheet might not kick into irreversible melting, and it just may be enough to save most of the world's coral reefs from completely dying. So that's where we are, Grace.
Mm-hmm. I mean, those are significant. I don't have the exact numbers. I don't know. It doesn't have it on here, but I mean, half as many people would suffer from lack of water. I mean, there's so many people suffering from lack of access to just decent, clean water today.
Yeah.
And if you can imagine how much worse that has the capability of getting, it's pretty sobering.
Yeah. And bottom line message, even in the AP report, is meeting the more ambitious goals of slightly less warming would require immediate draconian cuts in emissions of heat-trapping gases and dramatic changes in the energy field. While the UN panel says technically that's possible, it saw little chance of the needed adjustments happening.
It's terrifying, but at the same time, you can understand where they're coming from with the list of things that have to change and the magnitude that those things have to change. It should scare you. Yeah, it should scare you, but it should hopefully call people to action to try to do something now. And we might touch on this later, but talking about what are the other things you can do, voting to try to have a larger effect. You're a small individual, and we do talk about the individual things that you can do, but one of the individual things you can do that does have far-reaching effects on a much larger scale is voting to get the right people in office that can help make larger scale changes faster.
Yeah, and I think we'll talk more
right.
as this episode goes on a little bit about things that need to be done both at the system level and in our individual lives. And I just want to say, because I can't resist editorializing every chance I get, is that until a few years ago, I felt like climate change was not even the most serious problem that we face or the most serious symptom of overshoot, of the scale of the human enterprise outgrowing the planet. And I was told that, in fact, by Paul Ehrlich, the legendary Stanford scientist who wrote The Population Bomb back in 1968, and who's still at Stanford today. And he's certainly not poo-pooing all of this concern about climate change, but he's repeatedly made the point that there are a number of other things that we're doing that are pretty existential crises as well. Mm-hmm. But it does seem like we've just been blasting through the capacity of our atmosphere to process our carbon waste so fast that it now is probably the most looming. It's going to be the first.
It's at the forefront more than anything else right now.
Yeah. So that's why we're talking about it. I don't want anyone to think that's the only thing, but it's probably the biggest emergency right now. And if anything, that will get us to start addressing the size of our footprint. I'm all for ringing that bell.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, there's one other thing I do want to share from that AP story, and that was apparently the scientists that are on this panel, they ran 529 different possible future scenarios that were designed to keep warming below the 1.5 degrees Celsius goal without the temperature going above that. And of the 529 possible future scenarios, less than 2% of them managed to keep us from blasting through that 1.5 degrees and then finally coming back down. That's how great the challenge is before us.
But, great challenge, great opportunities. It might be I'm being overly positive now. I don't know. I'm trying to put a positive spin on it.
It is. It's an opportunity. I heard somebody say the other day it's the biggest business opportunity in memory. There are bound to be some people who can make some good money with some services, hopefully not just products, but services that will help us to skinny up our carbon footprint. I will put a link to that AP story in the show notes because it really is the best reporting I saw on it. But I also found a good summary titled 8 Things You Need to Know About the IPCC 1.5 degrees Celsius report that was written by Kelly Levin at World Resources Institute. And that's worth a read. We can't do a 3-hour podcast. Only Joe Rogan can do those. So I'll include a link to that in the show notes. Saturday Night Live may have summed up our predicament best in their weekend update after the IPCC report came out. So let me play just a moment of that for you, Chris.
This was pretty crazy, but look, it's not the end of the world, okay? Because this is the end of the world. That's right, scientists basically published an obituary for the Earth this week, and people were like, yeah, but what does Taylor Swift think about it? We don't really worry about climate change because it's too overwhelming and we're already in too deep. It's like if you owe your bookie $1,000, you're like, okay, I got to pay this dude back. But if you owe your bookie $1 million, you're like, I guess I'm just going to die.
This story has been stressing me out all week. I just keep asking myself, why don't I care about this? I mean, don't get me wrong, I 100% believe in climate change, yet I'm willing to do absolutely nothing about it. I mean, we're all gonna lose the planet. We should be sad, right? Like, this whole episode should be like a telethon or something, but it's not. I think it's because they keep telling us we're gonna lose everything, and nobody cares about everything. People only care about some things. Like, if Fox News reported that in 2030 climate change is going to take away all the flags and Confederate statues, there'd be recycling bins outside of every Cracker Barrel and Dick's Sporting Goods. White dudes would learn how to recycle then. Black people already recycle good. Every container in my apartment used to be something else. But you know how much more black people would care about the planet if you told us we was going to lose Atlanta in 10 years? Black dudes would put windmills on their rims. You want white women to care about the environment? Tell them that if they don't do something about climate change, we're going to lose all the yarn. White women love yarn. No more hats, no more scarves, no more of those ridiculous socks you knit for your dog.
Oh my gosh. I love Saturday Night Live.
Boy, and they have a way of hitting the nail on the head. That's sad that is the head of the nail, isn't it?
Yeah. I actually read a piece from The Guardian where it's discussing the idea that we actually are aware that climate change is happening, that people believe it, as they mentioned, that they 100% believe it, but that they just might not care. And I think that's even more concerning than saying that you don't believe it exists. You're acknowledging it, but it doesn't matter to you. And that opens a whole new can of worms, really. And one of the articles I actually found is from The Guardian, entitled "The Trump Administration Knows the Planet is Going to Boil. It Doesn't Care." It's by Bill McKibben. And in particular, there is a blurb from the article that says, "In the first, the administration provided the rationale for scrapping President Obama's automobile mileage standards because Trump's crew now officially expects the planet to warm by 4 degrees Celsius. In the environmental impact statement, they say it wouldn't make much difference to the destruction of the planet if we keep driving SUVs." Seriously? So forget 1.5. Let's just go to 4 degrees. That's fine.
Yeah, that is... If we've got that working against us, we are in deep doo-doo.
That's insane. And this is the leader of our country. That's terrifying.
Good God.
This article is saying that they do know, but they just don't care. And one of the things that I found really concerning is that it seems that Trump is comfortable with the planet increasing by 4 degrees Celsius.
It would be just over 7 degrees Fahrenheit. But that's a chunk.
I was going to say that sounds ridiculous, but yeah, that's huge. We're talking about all the catastrophic events that are going to happen with just 1.5 degrees increase. And they're comfortable with 4 degrees increase. Like, how crazy is that? That's absolutely insane to me that we have an administration that is okay with that just says, you know what, it's fine. So I'm not sure if for them it's a combination of ignorance and apathy. He knows that this is happening. And does he just not understand what the implications are? Is he just not willing to listen to the experts who are telling him what the implications are? I'm not sure.
Well, you have to pay attention a little longer or read a little further to realize that, and I hope most people do, I think most people do, that it's not just that you're going to have to run your air conditioner a little more.
Right. Which is what I feel like a lot of it is. It's like, I can deal with heat. I can deal with heat. There are, I can handle it. And it's like, we're not just talking about you individually having to put on a tank top or jump in the pool. So
yeah, plus I think the most recent estimate I've seen is that we'll lose about 10% of the global agricultural yield with each degree Celsius of warming. So 4 degrees warming, if you're saying that the U.S. president would be comfortable with that, that would be giving up 40% of the global agricultural yield.
And then you're going to have climate refugees. I mean, he's already uncomfortable with regular refugees. I'm sorry.
Let's see. Are you a regular refugee or a climate
you're
refugee?
You're a special refugee. You're a refugee that I made happen. So
yeah. Good point. That's scary. And I guess we've gotten over one hump, which is there are very few people that are debating whether human carbon emissions are disrupting the climate. But now we have to care enough to want to do something about it.
Yeah, and it's just to the point now, how much are you comfortable with? It's like everyone seems to accept that it's going to happen, but some people have varying degrees, literally, that they're comfortable with it increasing. So it's...
Yeah, there you go. So there's a really good piece. I want to include a link to this in the show notes as well. That was written by Jeff Goodell in Rolling Stone called Can Civilization Survive What's Coming? The new IPCC report on climate change will fill you with existential dread. Rightfully so. And Jeff wrote, 1,000 years from now, when some vaguely human-like machine digs through the ashes of the 21st century and tries to figure out what happened to those once thriving animals called Homo sapiens, it may be confused about why an intelligent species that could build rockets and write songs like Imagine couldn't heed warnings of its own destruction. A key question for future historians of the universe: how stupid were those humans anyway? Well, and that's the question. We are going to be living the answer to that over the next couple of decades.
When I first read that, I looked at it as, how stupid are you in terms of ignorance? But you could be stupid too if you just ignore the warnings, accepting the process, but just ignoring the implications.
Well, we're just not used to slow motion emergencies.
Yeah.
You know?
You think emergency, you think it's happening this very second,
Yeah.
this instant, and it has to be dealt with. I've said this before, but the far-reaching effects down the road.
Yeah. And you're not going to like this one little bit, but a few people took advantage of this opportunity to remind us that the IPCC reports are usually pretty cautious.
Yeah.
And so it's probably worse than this report is indicating.
They do that with the intention of wanting people to still think that there's hope, that they can do something about it. But, I don't want to out them too much, because I think from what I've read, that's a good approach. But at the same time, we've had that approach for a long time, and we still have so much pushback. So maybe we do need to take a different approach and see how that works for us and say, guess what? Just kidding. It's a whole lot worse.
Yeah, I guess so. Because we've been trying the Pollyanna thing for so long. And in fact, there's another good piece. I'll include a link. Lots of links, lots of reading if you really want to dig deeper into this. Piece called It's Even Worse Than the Report Indicates. And this was a commentary written by Ken Livingstone, who was mayor of London from 2000 to 2008. And he actually wrote this shortly before the most recent IPCC report was published. In his piece, he quoted Bob Ward, policy director at the Grantham Research Institute on Climate Change and the Environment, and he said that Bob Ward had said, downplaying the worst impacts of climate change has led to the authors omitting crucial information about the summary for policymakers. He went on to say, quote, if governments do not recognize the scale and urgency of the risks, they may underestimate how critical it is to meet the goal of the Paris Agreement on climate change. Mm-hmm. And that could have very serious effects in the battle to limit the impact of global warming. So now we really have cranked up the alarms, probably not as fully as they should be, but are they enough to shake up the policymakers, and are they enough to shake up the general public?
Yeah, I think we need to take the gloves off, and I think we're starting to do that. But like he's saying, the policymakers need to know the facts. So if you have information on just how terrible it is, I don't know, I say at this point, just put it out there. No holds barred, just there it is.
Yep.
It's terrible, and we need to do something about it.
We'll see what happens.
Yeah.
Just barely changing the subject, we want to introduce a new voice and perspective on the podcast. Heidi Bischof impressed us with a few essays she wrote and published on Medium about sustainable living, and she's running a project she calls Earth Ethic. And she's doing that from her home in Sydney, Australia, and we're going to try a little experiment where we'll be hearing from her, perhaps somewhat regularly, about rearranging our lives in a more sustainable manner. So, to introduce Heidi this week, I want to share a conversation. I rang her up to chat about this new climate change report, and this seems like a really opportune moment to share that conversation.
Excellent.
One of the things that I think is kind of sadly exciting about this new IPCC report is it seems like they finally flipped on the sirens and the flashing lights and said, hey, this is an emergency. Wake up. For 50 years, they've been saying it too nicely.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic that they did this report. Yeah, it shows that, maybe we will start to, be forced maybe to take it more seriously now. And hopefully even, the laggers, the countries out there who are really not pulling their weight, will be forced to actually pull their socks up a bit.
Well, you may be overly optimistic just because you're so many thousands of miles away from the center of climate change denial here in the U.S., maybe. But Even I am optimistic a little bit. Is there anything in particular, though, that this made you want to share with our listeners today?
I suppose the one thing, I know there's obviously a difference between 1.5 and 2 degrees, but one thing I read in this article was what it will mean for coral reefs, and that I think with 2 degrees warming, I think virtually all our coral reefs would be destroyed. With 1.5 degrees, I think it was maybe 80%. And I was just thinking, that's still a fair chunk of them. So, so even I'm thinking 1.5 is still too much. So I really hope we will go for less than that. I really do.
I was really curious to see what kind of response do we get. And of course, immediately after the report is out there, my email inbox starts filling up with emails from all of the environmental organizations that I like to kind of keep track of. And 350.org, of course, is one that you always expect to be right on top of everything related to climate change. And 350.org is doing some serious stuff, including they've got an online program where you can help to make sure that this report gets in front of the policymakers that need to see it. And they published, here's a really good example of what kind of bugs me a little bit, and I want to get your take on this. 350.org put together these talking points so that if you're talking to a policymaker or talking to news media or whoever, you would have some intelligent things to say. What are the key messages that we want to focus on? And all these talking points are good. They're all about how we really need to be fossil free. But it all seems to be put on the system. We've got to change the system. We've got to have carbon tax, or we need government regulation. We need this system to put the fossil fuel industry out of business or get it to change businesses. And there's nothing in that set of talking points. There's nothing about leaving your car in the garage and getting on a bicycle, taking public transportation, any of the things that an individual can do. I guess you can say what one individual does isn't going to make much of a difference, but if you multiply that by millions or even billions of people, it really does add up. If we can't get the policymakers to put the fossil fuel industry out of business, we have the power to put them out of business by not buying their products.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And that's the approach that I take with plastic as well. Yeah, there definitely needs to be more focus on that. And I think, part of the problem is so many people just believe, they're changing their behaviour is not going to make a difference in the scheme of things. Yeah, but the key is for us all to be taking that sort of action simultaneously, and then that will create the impact that we want to see.
Well, and I'm certainly not trying to say that we don't need government intervention and that we don't need policies to change, but I am one to say let's not sit on our thumbs and wait for them to do the right thing. Good heavens, we've been waiting way too long already, and that we might need to lead them. We're the leaders. Yeah. Yeah, afraid so. We've been waiting for the leaders to lead, and they don't have it, especially in the United States. Certainly in other parts of the world, we're seeing better signs of leadership. But so I'm really hoping that you might visit with us on a regular basis and help us in our journey to sustainability, explore the things that we can do as individuals, and feel the power knowing that if enough of us are doing it, it really will make a difference. Plus, eventually, maybe the policymakers, if they aren't getting the message from this latest IPCC report, maybe they will get the message when they're the only one left out there with their Hummer idling in the driveway while all of their neighbors are walking to work.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I would love to do that. Yeah, it would be an honour. And yeah, I think that's what it is. It's the grassroots kind of action. I think that's how it's going to work, because it hasn't worked from the top down so far, and we're running out of time.
Yeah. Now, Heidi, do you think maybe one of the reasons we're not getting that message, except from people like you and me, and maybe one of the reasons that even a great organization like 350.org isn't putting out that message, is that there's this fear of, and maybe even a reality, that people really, they're too lazy to do something. They really are just waiting for the government to tell them what they have to do?
Yeah, I think, that's definitely a factor. For me, I did surveys with my ideal clients, I guess, and one of the key things that came out of those was not having enough time. You know, that the reason they made unsustainable choices was the convenience factor. And yeah, sadly, that's just how our modern world is. It's all focused on, we're just so busy, and it's all about saving time and convenience, and we're so stressed, we're not happy. So, you know, something's not really quite right here, is it?
No, and I think you wrote, and I'm going to paraphrase this maybe liberally, but I think you've written that if we step off that treadmill in service to this over-consuming capitalist society that we've created, that it turns out that you really do have time. That as you start to adopt simpler ways of living, more sustainable ways of living, it doesn't end up taking a whole lot more time. It frees up your time to do things that really count.
Yeah, that's right. I think we just get so caught up in it and we don't take a step back to sort of see the big picture and just say, hang on a minute, are all these things I'm doing necessary? Are they important? Are they fulfilling? And yeah, so I just think we need to reassess our lives a bit and just focus on the things that really do matter, the things that do bring quality and fulfillment to our lives. And the other thing is mindfulness. Like, I'm not sure if you're familiar with that concept, but when we are mindful, and like, which is about being 100% present with the task at hand, time slows down. Our perception of time passing slows down. So it feels like we have more time. And I've experienced that, and it's and I'm so determined to, like, I wouldn't say I'm as mindful as I'd like to be right now, but I'm so determined to be, because, you know, I'm getting on, and anything that can slow time down would be most welcome.
Well, good point. And that's really big, and that's something I hope we can talk about and explore more as the Growth Busters podcast project continues. One good example that comes to mind is you work like a dog and work long hours so that you can afford to buy your groceries, and you can't afford to work less because then you can't buy the groceries. But if you work less, you would have more time to actually grow some food in your garden that you wouldn't have to buy.
Yeah, that's right. That's a great example, yeah, of how it could work.
Okay, now that may be a great example, and thank you for that, Heidi, but I'm going to be counting on you to actually articulate it so much better than I could, because you're certainly writing about these subjects really well.
Yeah, sure. No, thank you.
And in fact, there is something that you wrote. I think this might be a really great closing quote for this conversation. You wrote in Saving the Planet, How to Find Your Missing Why, and I'll include a link to this in the show notes. You wrote, "It is an undeniable fact that we need to act now if we are to save this planet, each and every one of us." That should have been the closing line of this IPCC report.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Connecting it to every individual, I think. Connecting the issue to every individual. That was my first article. And I think that's the missing piece here, is the connection. Like, people just aren't connected to the issue. And until they are, they're not going to act. They're not going to take personal action. So I guess I see that as, you know, my role, and hopefully there's plenty of other people out there as well, because I don't think I could do it alone, but to help them make that connection. So first of all, to raise awareness of the issue, but then to make it personally relevant to them. So to say, you know, look, what sort of future, if any, are your children going to have on this planet if we don't take whatever action? Yeah, that's where we need to start, to get people to connect to the issue and then to take the action they need to take.
Yeah, and you know, my theory is that people may say, well, that's a little thing, that you ditch the plastic straw. But the more of these little things we do, the more it just becomes front of mind for us, and we're automatically coming up with lots of other ways we can decarbonize our lives and simplify our lives, shrink our footprint. Things like taking the stairs instead of the elevator. I watch people and they mindlessly just walk up to the elevator and push the button and get on it, even if they're just going a floor or two. They don't even look for the stairs, and sadly the stairs are usually pretty well hidden. But I don't know, if you had 1 billion fewer people on the planet taking elevators every day, would that add up to a certain significant amount of CO2 less in the atmosphere? I think so.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. There's so many little things like that. I had the same issue at my last workplace. I would see people just take the stairs when they didn't need to. And I came across these great signs that I meant to print out. I never got around to it. That basically said, you can burn X calories by taking the stairs. And it was just things to give people, to make them aware of it, but also to show them how they can benefit, that there's something in it for them, which is also a key to getting people to act.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I think that's one of the big things, is that 350.org may be afraid to advise people or encourage people or try to inspire people to stop driving, turn down their thermostat, and all those things that they could do to shrink their own carbon footprint. They may be afraid to recommend that because it's not fun, it's work, it's a sacrifice. And what would you say to that, Heidi? Is it really a big sacrifice to have a smaller footprint?
I know that many people would definitely perceive it that way for many things. There's so many things out there that we can take action on, and for many of those, people would see it as an inconvenience. Like, for instance, to not drive, to walk instead of driving. Like, I notice my own behaviour even. I will take the car when I don't absolutely need to, but my reasoning is, but I'll save time, and the hassle of getting the bike out of the garage. And so I don't always make the best choices, but it's about developing a habit, I think. And once you start, then you'll start seeing the benefits. Like, you start losing some weight by walking more or cycling more, and, save money on petrol, and it can really add up. And once we get in those habits, then I believe it takes 21 days to develop a new habit. So if we do that consistently for 21 days straight, then it becomes easier. We'll start to see the benefits, and maybe our perception will change that, maybe it's not such an inconvenience.
I can tell we're going to get along just beautifully, because you confessed. And that's something I try to do all the time. I'm so far from perfect in my journey to sustainability. And in fact, you've written about that too. You've written it's not about getting it perfect. It's about making gradual changes at a time and of a scale that fits in with our life.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. That's the only way it can work. I think if we try to do it all at once, or if we think we have to do it all at once, then it just puts us off, and we just put it in the too hard basket, and we don't do anything.
Yeah. Well, I think we've talked about some really big picture subjects today, and I want you to know you're invited to deal with that level of thinking at any time on the Growth Busters podcast. But I also really am looking forward to and invite you to come to us with some, a little more down-to-earth ideas from time to time, really just about sustainable living, some things that we can do in our own life, in our own home, to experience the joy of shrinking our carbon footprint. Yeah,
that sounds great.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much.
For having me.
You're welcome, and thanks for joining me. This was fun.
Yeah, no, it was great to talk to you. Thank you.
I don't think individual action alone will do it, but we might have to lead the leaders.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the biggest thing, and I brought this up before, and now this is kind of coming back to it, is the voting thing, because that is an individual action, but it has far-reaching effects, and it has much more influence, because I think joining up together and, becoming a part of, coalitions and groups and things like that is really where the change is going to happen. And it's kind of linking those two, the individual action with the larger scale.
Yeah, because undoubtedly we're going to need some policy changes to make the massive changes, the draconian changes that are needed.
That we're talking
about. Voting, that's the key to that. Do you get the sense that most politicians, if they do believe that we needed to make really drastic changes to reduce our carbon footprint, they weren't really willing to say that in their campaigns because that was considered maybe a little too extreme?
Yeah, absolutely. If you just think about when the politicians are campaigning, people want to hear what they're going to be doing for them. And if the politicians know what's important to the people, they're going to incorporate that.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
So if you make it known that these are issues that matter to you, that might be something that gets incorporated.
Yeah. So I think we're going to, from this day forward, see more candor about that and more, hopefully, realistic offerings from candidates for public office.
I agree. I think that people are starting to want to hear more about it. As it moves to the forefront, it's something that they're going to have to start talking about. They're going to have to give their position on. And I think, if nothing else, that'll make it easier to choose the candidate that you think is going to be the best for that.
Yeah, we've got to have a public that's informed and engaged and alarmed enough to say, I'm not going to vote for that candidate over there who says, oh, it's too expensive for us to do what they're saying we need to do, so
let's just not do it.
Let's just not do it. It's too inconvenient.
Yeah. Well, it's inconvenient. The planet falling apart.
Yep, that's going to be very
in general terms. But
and you won't get a do-over then. You can't say, oh, let's go back. Sorry.
Yeah, mulligan.
Do-over, yeah. But speaking about what individuals can do, because I was disappointed that almost to a T, all the NGOs were really focused on forcing these big systemic actions and not also saying, by the way, where is your thermostat set and what kind of vehicle are you driving? And more importantly, how much time are you spending on your bicycle and public transportation and all these other things that we all do need to be doing. So I really do want to give a shout out to Matthew Taylor and Adam Vaughan, who wrote a piece in the UK Guardian called Overwhelmed by Climate Change? Here's what you can do. So they did offer a list of individual tactics. Thank goodness, because we need more of those, and we're going to be reminding you of those every episode of Growth Busters. In fact, that's a lot of what Growth Busters is all about. So they listed things like eat less meat, insulate your home, switch to renewable energy whenever possible, walk or cycle where possible. Vote was on the list, so thank you for introducing that concept, Grace, prior to that. Reduce, recycle, reuse, and don't just sit back and wait for somebody else to tell you what to do.
Yeah.
We got to get busy.
Absolutely.
I think this might be a really good way to close, because even if it's not going to save the planet, and you know what? It isn't. There are some other good reasons to do that, and I think it was really summarized beautifully by this piece that I read in Counterpunch by Christine Mattis, and it was called Eco-Crises, Doom and Gloom, Truth and Consequences. And I will definitely include a link to this in the show notes so that you can read the whole thing. And I was just really impressed with what Christine Mattis wrote. And just in case you're curious, she's an environmental scholar with a background in biology, earth system science, and policy. I guess she's in graduate school. And she actually worked as a medical researcher, a science reporter for the U.S. Congressional Record, and as a science and health teacher. So she wrote this piece for Counterpunch, and the part that I think is really relevant here is, let me quote, "There are people who live every moment of their lives with environmental sustainability in mind. They might say, I don't live this way because I will save the world. I live this way because it is the only way to live. If we all, or at least the majority of us, were to come closer to making those moral and ethical choices, we might have a fighting chance against both fascism and environmental devastation." And I think that's kind of it for me. It's that the more things you do, if you do vote, if you do walk to the bus stop, if you do take the train and don't even own a car, if you buy local, if you recycle, if you turn the thermostat down in the winter, all of those things, they just give you joy. You can't help but feel good about doing the right thing. Even if it isn't enough, at least we will have made the right choices, the ethical choices, and given it our best shot. And
to do the opposite of that sort of sounds like a defeatist attitude. You're just sort of accepting your fate and rolling over and dying.
And if you just absolutely have to have a practical reason to do all that, the households where children are being raised today with that kind of ethic, those children are going to be the policymakers of the future if the human race survives. Imagine if we had policymakers today who lived in households 10, 20 years ago that really practiced that really strong conservation ethic. We would have policymakers making the kind of policy we need.
Yeah.
That's a real long-term view. Let's hope there is a long-term.
I hope so.
All right. Well, don't forget to explore issues at growthbusters.org. Subscribe to the podcast on your podcast app. Give us a review. Tell your friends about us if you like what we're doing, because we need to spread the word. Till the next episode, adios.
Take care.
Some may dream to pave mountains and streams, but not me. I'm a growth buster. Some may just want more, but don't know what it's for, but not me. I'm a growth buster. Don't want a solution at the cost of pollution. They think bigger is better at the cost of the weather, but no, not us. We are the growth busters. Calling, 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 calling. Call the growth busters.